It's beautiful words, isn't that song? Well done, good and faithful servant. Looking forward to hearing those words. How about you? There's 5 things that God does not know. Do you know what they are? Let's say them together. God does not know a sin he does not hate. He does not know a sinner he does not love. He does not know a heart he cannot change. He does not know a sin he cannot forgive. And he does not know a better time than now. Tomorrow is Mother's Day. How many of you still have mothers? All right? Okay. See, my mother passed away in 1992. So it's been some time ago. But you know, sometimes I even think about, I need to call my mother. Especially when it gets close to Mother's Day, you know, you're thinking about Mother, right? But I am looking forward to saying to her hello in heaven. I look forward to seeing her there. One of the women listed in the Bible that I think is a woman of great piety, honor, dignity, a woman who was a woman of nobility. That is, she was very noble in her actions. And it is this Abigail who later became David's wife. Well, the story begins by David, of course, leaving and going to the wilderness of Paran. And we pick up on verse 2 of chapter 25 of 1 Samuel. And there was a man in Maon whose possessions were in Carmel. And the man was very great. And he had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. And he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Now the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife Abigail. And she was a woman of good understanding and of a beautiful countenance. But the man was churlish and evil in his doings, and he was of the house of Caleb. So you have 2 distinct individuals here. One is described as being really rude, unkind, uncourteous. He was just evil. Just evil. An evil man. But here is this beautiful woman who is married to him, who is not only beautiful, but she's a very intellectual woman, very smart. And in verse 4, and David heard in the wilderness of Nabal and shearing his sheep, and David sent out 10 young men. David said unto the young men, get you up to Carmel and go to Nabal and greet him in my name. And thus shall he say unto him that liveth in prosperity, peace be both to thee, and peace be to thine house. Peace be unto all that thou hast. And now I have heard that thou hast shears. Now thy shepherds which were with us, we hurt them not, neither was there aught missing unto them. And all the while they were in Carmel. Ask thy young men, and they will show thee. Wherefore let the young men find favor in thine eyes, for we come in a good day. Give, I pray thee, whatsoever cometh to thine hand unto thy servants and to thy son David. And so the young men came, and they said those things to Nabal. And verse 10, he says, who is David? Who is he? And who is the son of Jesse? There be many servants nowadays that break away, every man from his master. Shall I then take my bread and my water and my flesh that I have killed for my shears, and give it unto men whom I know not whence they be? So David's young men turned their way and went again, and came and told him all these things. And David said unto his men, give ye on every man, gird ye on every man his sword, and they girded on every man his sword, and David also girded on his sword. And there went up after David about 400 men, and 200 abode by the stuff. In other words, David was angry, very angry. David was a very impatient man. Here his men had taken care of the shepherds and guarded over them and the sheep and all of his flocks. Because it was a custom then, that if you did a favor like that, then, you saved the owner of all of his property, all of those sheep. He spared them. He protected them from all the marauding bands that were coming around. And that's what they did. They would steal sheep, right? Sheep stealers. They would steal the sheep. And maybe even kill someone if they got in their way. And David's men were there, and they had a good rapport with all of those shepherds and those who were caring for those, watching over those sheep. They had a good rapport. And they liked each other. And this man, Nabal, who was an evil man, said, I don't know David. Do you think I'm not giving him nothing? Even after David had probably saved him a lot of losses that translated into a lot of money. Didn't make any difference. But it was a custom then that they would return a favor. They would give whatever they needed, to those who protected their flocks. But he didn't want nothing to do with David. But they said that the men were very good to us. And verse 16 it says, they were a wall unto us both by night and day, all the while we were with them keeping the sheep. None therefore knew and considered what thou wilt do. For evil is determined against our master and against all his household, for he is such a son of Belial, that a man cannot speak to him. In other words, you can't reason with Nabal. He is unreasonable. He doesn't want to hear it. He does everything his way. You can't tell this man anything. You can't give him any counsel. He just does what he wants to do. In verse 18, then Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves and 2 bottles of wine and 5 sheep ready dressed, and 5 measures of parched corn, and 100 clusters of raisins, 200 cakes of figs, and laid them on asses. And she said unto her servants, go on before me, behold, I come after you. But she told not her husband Nabal. And it was so. So she rode on the ass, and she came down by the covert of the hill, and behold, David and his men came down against her, and she met them. And David had said, surely in vain have I kept all that this fellow hath in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that pertained unto him, and he hath required me evil for good. And then, of course, it goes on, and Abigail saw David, and she got off of the ass there, and she fell before David on her face and bowed herself to the ground. In verse 24, and fell at his feet and said, upon me, my Lord, upon me let this iniquity be, and let thine handmaid, I pray thee, speak in thine audience, and hear the words of thine handmaid. What a woman, right? What a woman. Here she is, out again, covering for her husband. This wasn't, I'm sure, the first time she had to make peace, try to make peace with neighbors and people that he offended, people that were ready to take his life. I'm sure it wasn't the first time. And here she is, falling on her face before David. She says, verse 25, let not my Lord, I pray thee, regard this man of Belial, even Nabal, For as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. And I, thine handmaid, saw not the young men of my Lord whom thou didst send. Now therefore, my Lord, as the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, seeing the Lord hath withholden thee from coming to shed blood, and from avenging thyself from thine own hand, let thine enemies and they that seek evil of my Lord be as Nabal. In other words, Nabal, Belial, son of worthlessness. He's no good. He's evil. She said that about her husband. Did you ever think about how in the world did this beautiful, intelligent woman, who is a godly woman, got married to this man Nabal? I'm sure it was probably a marriage she didn't want, but it was an arranged marriage. Parents probably thought, hey, this is really great. Nabal, look at him. He comes from wealthy parentage. He has money. He has, look at all of his land. Look at his livestock. I mean, he's going to take care of her very well, right? And so that's what they did back then. Parents arranged those marriages so many, many times. And here is this godly woman married to this devil. Can you imagine? Yeah, really. Evil man. He is what we call today a hedonist. That's what he was. Just lived for himself. A man of great pleasure. He loved pleasure. He loved it. Verse 27, and now this blessing which thine handmaid hath brought unto my Lord, let it even be given unto the young men that follow my Lord. You know, who inspired her to do this? Do you think the Lord gave her a dream? I think the Lord had something to do with it. But I believe she did it because it was her nature to do that. She did it because that's what she did all the time. She was covering for her husband all the time. Praying for her husband all the time, but it didn't do any good. It didn't do any good. And then verse 36, and Abigail came to Nabal, and behold, he held a feast in his house, like the feast of a king. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunken. Wherefore she told him nothing less or more until the morning light. But it came to pass in the morning, when the wine was gone out of Nabal, and his wife had told him these things, that his heart died within him, and he became as stone or paralyzed. Probably had a stroke or something. Man of just who was wrapped up in himself. He didn't think anything about anybody. He didn't care about anybody else except himself. He lived for the moment, and pleasure was what he was looking for. He was looking for more alcohol. We would say today, a hedonist would be one who loves alcohol, who loves drugs, who loves parties after party after party. And you hear about some of these people who are very wealthy in this world today, today, who are very wealthy, and they are hedonists. They live for themselves. They go and they party all the time. The end of their life is over, and what have they contributed? They have lost everything. Everything. Living for the moment, living for this world. What does it profit a man, Jesus said, if he should gain the whole world and lose his own soul? What does it profit a woman if she would gain the whole world and lose her own soul? Here was a woman who was married to this man, who did all she could by her godly example. And I believe that the servants in that household loved her. Don't you? They respected her. They looked up to her. She was a woman not only of physical beauty, but of inward beauty, which is the most important thing, right? She was a very pious woman. A very pious woman. Then you know the story. After Nabal, he died about 10 days later. And then the Bible says that David communed, that is, he talked with her. And he wanted her to be his wife. And so he sent a delegation, to bring her. And she said, yes, I will go. She became his wife. Think of that. Then it says also he married someone else. I want you to ponder this. What would David's life and his family been like if he had only married one woman by the name of Abigail? Think about that. His whole life, his family would have been much different. History would have been different. Through many, many centuries, it would have been different had he just married this godly woman, Abigail. Isn't that something? A woman who was intelligent. She had something up here, right? She was smart. That's why I married my wife. Well, one of the reasons. She was pretty also. Still pretty to me. Love her. Well, anyway, here we have history. David took upon himself another wife. And others, of course. I want you to look at Romans chapter 12, verse 2. What kind of a mother did Abigail, what kind of a mother was she, do you think? She had a son. He had two names. The name I like is Daniel because it's easy to pronounce, right? Daniel. God is my judge. And I think she was a very good mom. I think she was a mom who instilled in her son the love of God, the importance of serving him and loving him. I believe that's about what that mother taught her son. Chapter 12 of Romans and verse 2. And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Everything that involves, everything in our lives, let me put it this way, everything in our lives, everything. You see, and I've talked about this before, that we compartmentalize the spiritual and the secular. And you can't do it. They all go together. Who you are in church is who you should be where? In the world. Out there. You should be the same person. The same kind of person. Christians don't play games. We are who we are. We shouldn't be trying to disguise ourselves and present ourselves as somebody that we are not. What are we like at home? What are we like at home? Right? You have one picture of me. My family has another picture of me. Because they lived with me and they know a lot of my faults, right? And my shortcomings. But they still love me, right? And I love them. There is no perfect home. None. The only perfect home was in the Garden of Eden before sin came. That was a perfect home. It didn't last very long. But with Jesus in the family, what does the song go? Happy, happy home, isn't it? Happy, happy home with Jesus in the family. But be transformed, it says, by the renewing of your mind. We live in a world today where mothers, in our society here, the United States, we are becoming a godless society. Do you know that? Secularism is winning out. Humanism. And God is not in our homes. Do you know what is wrong with the United States today? I'll tell you, it is the family. That's what's wrong. Because the family, you know, the old saying is, so the church goes, so what? As the family goes, so the church goes. As the church goes, so the nation goes. Right? You have a deterioration of families today. Families, mothers who don't care about their kids that much. You read stories about them just about every day, right? Irresponsible. A mother who leaves her children in the car and then goes into a store to shop for several hours, and she comes out and she finds that one of them is dead because of the heat in the car. We can't really understand this, can we? We try to understand it, but we can't. It's just really hard for us. And yet God is a forgiving God. When we come to God after all of these things are done by human beings, God says there's not one sin that I cannot forgive. God will take the disasters of the family, and when the family comes to Jesus, who have done terrible things, when they give their life to Jesus, then something happens. The transformation happens, not only in the individual's life, but in the family itself. We have good mothers. I had a good mother. I've told you before, I wouldn't be here had it not been for my mother. We have good mothers, like some of these women. But I want you to look at 2 Timothy, and this is the description of our society today. It's very enlightening, as you have read it many, many, many times. Chapter 3 of 2 Timothy. For knowing also in the last days perilous times shall come. We're not in the last days, are we? I can just, don't forget this, right? Forget this passage. We're not in the last days. Yeah, I think we are, aren't we? Let's read on. For men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof, from such turn away. It's a really good description of our society today, isn't it? People live for pleasure. We have a lot of hedonistic people in our society who are just looking for pleasure. That's all they're looking for. Do we have a message for them, huh? Think of this. In those kinds of homes, you know, one of the things that really bothers me is when children are disrespectful to their mother. Oh, that really, I get kind of hot. It makes me angry. But you know what? Where did these children pick this up at? Disobedient. Not only to mother, but also to father. Disobedient to parents. Sassing their mother. They pick it up from their father. A father who is always berating his wife, the mother of his children, in their very presence, who's always condemning her, telling her she's not worth anything, she can't do anything right. A father who is always wants to be waited on. He does nothing whatsoever around the house, right, to help his wife. Always condemning her. And then the children, they're little, and they hear this. They grow up with this. And so it's just a natural thing to disrespect women in general and degrade them and to look at them as things. This is the families that we're living at today. But when we look at our church, what are we to see? We're to see a different kind of family, right? Different kind of mothers and fathers. A different kind of home. As I said, no Christian home is a perfect home. Now, after you have done your very best, mothers, and you've raised your children, you've taught them godly things, you've brought them to church, to Sabbath school, and to church. And yet, you know, when they get older and they leave the home and they go out, and it seems as though they leave God and the church behind, right? That happens. Don't get discouraged about this. You keep praying, right? You keep praying, and God works miracles. He will work miracles, so don't give up. And don't beat yourself up like we all do, right, as parents. What did I do wrong? Huh? What did we do wrong? Husbands and wives, you know, when they're talking, well, what did we do wrong? Johnny is gone. He has no interest in spiritual things. And we did our very best. What did we do wrong? Right? We always blame ourselves for anything like that. But we shouldn't do that. There is what God calls the free moral agent, right? We have the freedom to choose. And there will be children in heaven who have left the church, who have been raised in godly homes, who will indeed come back, right? They will come back to the Lord. So don't ever give up. You keep praying that the Lord indeed will continue to work in their lives and their hearts. And ask Him to give you wisdom and to know what to say and what not to say to your children who are out of the church, who have left the Lord. We want them back. And that's what we have to do. We just have to keep praying for our children. I want you to look at Luke chapter 3 and verse 46. The Gospel of Luke. And the 3rd chapter of Luke. And beginning, we're going to look at verse, I believe it is 40. What did I say, 46? Oh, here we go. Luke chapter 3, or I should say chapter 2. I'll start with verse 41. The boy Jesus in the temple. You know the story. His parents went down to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up to Jerusalem after the custom of the feast. And you know the story, how, at the end of the feast, they all were going back home. And they are out and on their way, and they find, oh, Jesus is not here. Where is he at? And you can imagine how frantic they were because Jesus was not with them. So they went on a whole day's journey. And verse 45, and when they found him not, they turned back again to Jerusalem seeking him. And it came to pass that after 3 days they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the doctors, both hearing them and asking them questions. And all that heard him were astonished at his understanding and answers. And when they saw him, they were amazed. And his mother said unto them, Son, thou hast thou thus dealt with us? Behold, thy father and I have sought thee sorrowing. They were really frantic. Where is Jesus? Do you know what I think? I think when they got back to Jerusalem, as the good parents that they were, where would he be? I know where he'll be. He'll be hanging around with them rowdy teenagers someplace. No, that thought didn't even come into mind. He's going to be someplace where there are godly people, religious people. And that's where he was at, in the temple. And there, listening, right? It says that he was listening to what they were saying. He was asking questions. And they all were astonished. Now, what does Jesus say? And he said unto them, how is it that he sought me? Wist ye not that I must be about my Father's business? Now, it says, and they understood not the saying when he spake unto them. And he went down with them and came to Nazareth, and was subject unto them. But his mother kept all these sayings in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. 12 years old, he says, must I be about my Father's business? Didn't understand it. Says Mary kept this in her heart. She knew Jesus was very special. He was the Messiah. She didn't understand so many things. I want to tell you, this woman was the epitome of a godly mother, wasn't she? Think of this. She was only about 17 years old when she became pregnant. The Immaculate Conception, a teenager, 17. She had godly parents, a godly mother in her life, and she in turn had good role models in her life. God chose her to be the father of our Savior. In all of her sinfulness, because she was a sinner just like we all, and she was the epitome of a good, godly mother. Jesus went back with them, and it said that he was subject to his father and mother. Anything that his mother asked him to do, he did it. His father asked him to do, he did it. Because he loved them. Jesus was the model child and teenager, wasn't he? What a godly home. Joseph passed away because he was quite a bit older than Mary. I want you to look at John chapter 2, verse 12. Mary. Not a lot is said about Mary in the scriptures, other than what we just mentioned, the life of Jesus, his supernatural birth, etc. She was there with him when he died on the cross. But it says here in verse 12 of chapter 2 of the Gospel of John, after this he went down to Capernaum. That is after the great miracle of turning the water into wine, or as we say, unfermented grape juice, right? She comes to him and says, we're out of wine. We have no more. What are we going to do? And he says, my time is not yet. In other words, he wasn't ready to do this. But Jesus, she said to the servants, you do whatever he tells you to do. What a mom. What a mom. You do whatever he tells you to do, all right? What does Jesus do? My time isn't yet, but all right, Mom, I'll do it for you. And he turned the water into wine, the first miracle. And then it says in verse 42, and after this they went down to Capernaum, he and his mother and his brethren and his disciples, and they continued there not many days. It seems as though Mary went with him on some of those trips. His mother went with him. What a mom, right? I'm going because you're going to need a woman's touch here with you fellas, right? In other words, she's going to be the mother to all of them. She's going to take care of them. Really, that's what we have in our church. Mothers, right? A lot of mothers. Guys, what would we be without our wives? What would we be without women in the church, right? This is something that Jesus always did. He was always uplifting women, wasn't he? Always uplifting women. He was elevating them to a higher status than what society looked at them. Where society had them was way down here, and Jesus was always lifting them up this way. Always lifting them up. And the first missionary was a woman at the well, wasn't she? She was his first missionary. Souls were won to Jesus Christ through this woman. What a missionary. Mothers, how important it is. Do you know, there's an old Spanish saying that says this: an ounce of motherhood is worth a pound of preaching. So true, isn't it? So you young moms, don't get discouraged. You hang in there. Listen to the Lord. Follow His counsels. And your kids will grow up to be godly children. Young men and women who love the Lord. We need really strong homes now. We need really strong women. You know, the thing that really sometimes pastors really get upset about, you know, if they've got little babies and they start crying when they're trying to preach. I just think of that as music to my ears. It doesn't bother me a bit. I can just keep on preaching. Right? But then some people will be looking back, why don't you keep that kid quiet? You know, and so I'm always thinking, why in the world doesn't some of the mothers in the church go back and help that young mother who's brought all of her kids here? Her husband's not here. She has no help, but she's bringing her children. You know, isn't that right? But then I see sometimes mothers who do get up and go back and help. And that's what we need to do. But an ounce of motherhood is worth a pound of preaching. Well, tomorrow, on all of you husbands, remember your wives, all right, to honor her. And children, your mothers, children whose mother is still alive, do something for her. You know, the big tragedy is that sometimes children only remember their moms during Mother's Day, usually. Maybe they'll call them a few times. If they're a long ways away, they hardly ever call. But they feel guilty when it comes to Mother's Day. I need to call my mother. This is something that we need to constantly do. Jesus was always caring for his mother. And there, as he died on that cross, he told John, remember my mother. Take care of her. Be sure that she's taken care of. He was always looking out for her. Always. I'm looking forward to meeting these beautiful, beautiful women listed here. These godly women like Abigail and like Mary, the mother of Jesus. We as Christians do not elevate her to a very high status like, you know, the Roman Catholics do. We don't believe she's in heaven. We believe that she's still in the grave waiting the second coming of Jesus. That's where she's at. She's there asleep, waiting for Jesus to come to wake his mother up. God is so good to us. He loves us so much. You know, my prayer is that this church will have mothers and fathers who love the Lord Jesus Christ with all their heart, mind, and souls. And that their home, indeed, will be a home that angels love to come and visit. An ounce of motherhood is worth a pound of preaching.